Meet Evelyn Parker, a 68-year-old woman whose life was turned upside down when a powerful storm took away everything she had built over decades. From the ruins of her home in Missouri to the cold rejection of her only son, Evelyn's journey reminds us that even in our later years, life can test us in unimaginable ways. Yet, within those struggles lies the chance for renewal, for courage, and for rediscovering love and dignity. Her story is not just about loss, it is about resilience, hope, and the power of second chances. This is the heart of Grandma's Final Chapter, a channel dedicated to telling emotional, thought-provoking stories about older adults, stories that shine a light on strength, independence, and the hidden battles faced by so many in silence. Here, every video is crafted to inspire healing, reflection, and connection within a global community of seniors and those who care about them. If you believe in the wisdom and value of older generations, join us by subscribing, liking, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from and become part of a supportive circle that proves aging is not about fading away, it is about living fully, with pride and joy, in every final chapter of life. My name is Evelyn Parker, and I am 68 years old. If you're hearing this, it means I've finally found the courage to speak about the day my life ended and began all at once. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Springfield, Missouri, a Tuesday like any other, or so I thought. The sky was a soft autumn blue when I poured my cup of tea, the same ritual I'd kept for decades. I had no reason to suspect that, within 15 minutes, everything familiar, the walls I'd painted with my husband, the garden where I'd planted roses year after year, the roof under which I raised my only son, would be torn away, leaving me with nothing but a single suitcase and the clothes on my back. The warning came in shrill, metallic bursts from the sirens. At first, I didn't believe it. Tornadoes were common here. People joked that Missourians could sleep through a storm, but this one was different. The air shifted, heavy and charged, like the breath of something monstrous crouching above the earth. I looked out the kitchen window and saw the sky twist into a bruised green, a color I will never forget. That was when fear wrapped itself around my chest. I ran to the basement, clutching Harold's old sweater, the one he wore the last winter before he passed. I thought it might protect me, though it was just fabric, just memory. The sound came next, not like thunder, but like a train grinding through my house. The walls shuddered, beams splintered, glass screamed as it shattered. For endless minutes, the storm ripped apart everything I had built across 4 decades. My breath caught in my throat as I prayed for mercy, prayed for survival. Then, silence. The kind of silence that tells you nothing will ever be the same. When I climbed those basement stairs, my legs nearly gave out beneath me. Where my living room used to be, there was only open sky. The dining table where my son, Michael, once scribbled his spelling words was gone. The kitchen, where I had made Sunday breakfasts for my family, had been reduced to scraps of wood and twisted metal. The roses I had tended with aching knees and blistered hands were nothing more than brown confetti scattered across the yard. I stood in that ruin, clutching the sweater, and realized that for the first time since Harold's funeral, I could not hold back my tears. I wept for the memories buried under rubble. I wept for the fragile safety I thought I still had. I wept because, at 68, I had lost my anchor, and I had no idea where to go next. That night, while neighbors searched through debris and emergency crews roamed the streets with flashlights, I sat on a broken step and stared at what used to be my home. A Red Cross volunteer pressed a blanket into my hands, her voice soft with pity. But pity could not replace a roof, or a bed, or the warmth of family. I had no husband to lean on, no siblings to call. Only one person in the world carried my blood, my son. I told myself he would understand. That family meant something, even if the years had stretched us thin. I told myself that once I called Michael, I would not feel so utterly alone. But as I would soon learn, storms do not only destroy houses, they reveal the fault lines in relationships, exposing where love has weakened, where loyalty has rotted. So this is where my story begins, with the howl of wind, the collapse of a roof, and a woman who thought she had already faced the worst life could offer. I was wrong. And before I go further, I want to ask you something, my listener. Have you ever lived through a moment when everything you trusted suddenly collapsed? If you have, please share your experience in the comments below. Because you are not alone, none of us are. Morning light revealed the truth that darkness had hidden. The night before, I had seen only shadows and outlines, a vague suggestion of devastation. Now the sun rose gently over Springfield and poured its light across what remained of my life. There was no mistaking the reality. My house was gone. I stood barefoot on what used to be the front porch, though the boards had been ripped away and the steps now led to nothing but air. The smell of splintered wood and damp earth hung heavy around me, mingled with the metallic tang of broken pipes and the faint sweetness of flowers crushed into mud. I turned slowly, my eyes searching for something familiar, some fragment of my old world to hold on to. Where the rose garden had once thrived, there was only chaos. For 20 years I had tended those roses. I planted them after Harold died, each bush a labor of aching knees, sunburned arms, and hope that beauty could grow even from grief. I used to talk to them, whispering the secrets of my widowhood as I clipped away the dead blooms. They had listened without judgment. Now they were nothing but shredded petals and thorns scattered across the yard, as though a giant hand had tossed them into a shredder. I wanted to pick up every petal, press them back into place, pretend they could bloom again. My eyes caught on a twisted slab of wood half buried in dirt. It took me a moment to recognize it. The dining table, the same table where Michael had once practiced his multiplication tables, pencil gripped tight in his small hand as I leaned over him with patient encouragement. We had celebrated birthdays there, cutting lopsided cakes and laughing at Harold's off-key singing. We had argued there too, when Michael grew into a teenager and insisted he knew everything. That table had been the heart of our family. Now it lay cracked in half, one leg jutting skyward like a broken bone. I sank to my knees beside it, pressing my palm to the splintered surface. Tears welled before I could stop them. For 8 years since Harold's funeral, I had held them back, determined to be strong, determined not to drown in grief. But there, in the wreckage, the dam inside me broke. I sobbed until my chest ached, my body shaking with the force of it. The storm had taken wood and stone, but what cut deepest was how it had unearthed memories I thought I had carefully buried. Above me stretched an endless blue sky, where once there had been ceilings and rafters and walls painted in warm cream tones. There was nothing. Only open air. I stared up at that void and felt smaller than I had ever felt in my life. It was as if the universe itself had peeled away the roof to show me how fragile everything truly was. You think your home is solid, safe, eternal, but in truth, it is paper against the breath of the wind. Neighbors wandered through their own ruins, their voices hushed, their footsteps tentative. I heard Mrs. Lawson calling for her dog, her voice cracking as she picked through the wreckage of her fence. Farther down the street, a child clutched a teddy bear that was missing one arm, her eyes wide with shock. We were a neighborhood of ghosts, moving through the remains of lives that no longer existed. I picked up a framed photograph that had somehow landed in a patch of weeds. It was Harold on our wedding day, grinning with that boyish confidence I had fallen in love with. His suit had been borrowed, slightly too big, and my dress had been hand-sewn by my aunt. But in that picture, we looked like royalty. I pressed the broken glass to my chest and closed my eyes. How cruel that this image had survived when the home it represented had not. Everywhere I turned, I saw the past mangled and destroyed. The rocking chair where I had nursed Michael through fevers was buried under debris. The quilt my mother had stitched before she died was tangled in tree branches. Even the kitchen clock that had ticked reliably for 40 years lay face down in the mud, its hands frozen at 3:17, the moment the tornado struck. The emptiness above, the silence around me, the fragments of memory scattered at my feet, all combined into a single crushing realization. I was not just mourning a house, I was mourning a lifetime. Each shattered object was a reminder of what I had loved, what I had lost, and what I could never rebuild. I sat there on the broken ground until the sun climbed high, tears drying on my cheeks, my body hollowed by grief. The Red Cross would call it a natural disaster, the insurance company would call it total loss, but for me, it was more than that. It was the stripping away of every illusion of safety I had left. It was the revelation that behind the walls we paint, and the gardens we plant, we are all standing under the same fragile sky. And sometimes that sky opens up to show us just how exposed we really are. By the second day after the storm, exhaustion clung to me like wet clothes. My arms ached from lifting what little could be salvaged, and my eyes burned from weeping until there were no tears left. I had slept barely an hour on a borrowed cot at the community shelter, surrounded by strangers murmuring in their sleep, their own grief heavy in the air. I stared at the ceiling of that gymnasium and realized with a cold clarity that there was only one person I could turn to. My son, Michael. Michael was my only child, the baby I had prayed for through years of trying, the boy who once clung to my skirts and whispered that I was his favorite person in the world. He was a man now, 43 years old, living in Kansas City, a regional manager for an insurance company with a good salary and a polished life. His house was only an hour away by car. I told myself that of course he would take me in. Blood is blood. No matter the distance that time had created, no matter the silence that had stretched between our holidays and phone calls, I was still his mother. My hands trembled as I borrowed a neighbor's phone and dialed his number. I had memorized it long ago, though I used it sparingly, usually for birthdays or quick updates around Christmas. The dial tone seemed endless, each ring pulling tighter at the knot in my stomach. Then his voice answered, deeper than I remembered, but still familiar. "Mom, what's wrong? You sound upset." Hearing him call me Mom broke something inside me. My voice came out smaller than I intended, raw from sleeplessness. "Michael, sweetheart, the tornado. It hit my house. It is gone. Everything is gone." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence so long I thought perhaps the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke, his words measured but touched with concern. "Are you hurt?" No, I am fine, just shaken, but I have nowhere to stay. I need a place for a little while, just until I figure things out." Another pause. I closed my eyes, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Then his voice softened. "Of course, Mom. Of course. Come here. We will figure this out." The relief that rushed through me was so powerful that my knees nearly buckled. I sat down hard on a piece of concrete, the phone still pressed to my ear, tears filling my eyes for the 100th time that week, but now from gratitude. My son had not forgotten me. Despite the years of awkward dinners and missed conversations, he was still my boy, and I was still his mother. For the first time since the storm, I allowed myself to breathe. I imagined the drive to Kansas City, the warm hug at his doorway, the comfort of being in a home untouched by disaster. I imagined setting my bags down in a spare bedroom, maybe cooking for him and his girlfriend, showing that I could still be useful, still contribute. I imagined falling asleep beneath a solid roof, the sound of rain tapping harmlessly at the window, safe at last. Neighbors bustled around me, carrying boxes, picking through rubble, exchanging stories of loss. But I felt lighter than I had since the tornado sirens had first begun to wail. I had somewhere to go, someone waiting for me. Later that afternoon, as the Red Cross volunteers handed out meals and bottled water, I found myself smiling faintly at the taste of plain white bread and peanut butter. It was not the food that filled me, but the thought that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow I would be in Kansas City. Tomorrow I would not be alone. That night I lay awake again, this time not in despair, but in anticipation. I pictured Michael as a boy, running across our yard with scraped knees, his laughter echoing through the summer air. I pictured him as a teenager, slamming doors and muttering that I did not understand him, yet still sneaking into the kitchen for late-night sandwiches I made without a word. I pictured him at 25, standing uncertain after his first heartbreak, leaning into me as I told him he would survive it, that love could come again. Surely that boy was still inside the man who now had a polished career and a beautiful home. Surely the bond between us had not eroded beyond recognition. Surely the same child who once whispered, "You are my favorite person, Mom," would not turn me away when I had lost everything. In the ruins of Springfield, surrounded by broken beams and shattered glass, I held that thought like a candle against the darkness. It flickered, fragile but real, and I shielded it with everything in me. Because sometimes, when the world has collapsed around you, a single promise from the voice of your child is enough to make you believe that you can keep going. I told myself that tomorrow I would walk through Michael's front door, and for the first time in days, I dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, I would be all right. The drive from Springfield to Kansas City felt longer than an hour. My body was sore from days of lifting debris, but my mind was restless, circling around the thought of Michael's voice on the phone. He had said, "Come here. We will figure this out." Those words replayed in my head like a song of comfort. As the miles stretched out before me, I tried to imagine what his house might feel like. I pictured warmth, safety, and maybe even laughter. For the first time since the tornado, hope carried me forward like a steady wind. When I pulled into his driveway, my heart leapt. His home stood untouched, its clean white siding and red door shining proudly against the neat row of trimmed lawns. The neighborhood looked like something from a magazine, polished, secure, untouched by chaos. I sat in the borrowed car for a long moment, clutching my small suitcase, afraid to disturb the perfect order of his world with my storm-soaked presence. Finally, I stepped out and walked to the door. My knees trembled as I lifted my hand to knock, but before I could, the door opened. Michael stood there, tall and familiar, his features a mirror of Harold's eyes and my own chin. Relief flooded me at the sight of him. For an instant, I believed everything would be all right. "Mom," he said, and though his voice carried surprise, there was something else in it too, something I could not name. Behind him appeared Heather, his girlfriend. She was younger than Michael by almost a decade, dressed in crisp white jeans and a silk blouse that shimmered in the light. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a bun so perfectly arranged it looked effortless. She smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. "Evelyn, how awful about your house," she said smoothly, her gaze sliding past me to the bags at my feet. Michael told me what happened. I stepped inside, the scent of lavender and expensive candles surrounding me. Their living room gleamed, white couches so spotless they looked unused, glass tables polished to mirror brightness, framed photographs of vacations and gatherings lined the shelves. It was the kind of space where everything had its place, and I felt clumsy and out of sorts simply standing there in my mud-stained shoes. "It is just temporary," I said quickly, lowering my voice as though apologizing for existing. "Just until the insurance comes through and I can find a small apartment. I will help with meals, with cleaning, anything you need." For a moment, silence filled the room. Michael sat across from me in a chair rather than beside me. His hands clasped together, his expression careful, almost businesslike. Heather shifted closer to him, her hand resting on his arm in a gesture that looked supportive but felt more like possession. Finally, she spoke. "Evelyn, we truly sympathize. But Michael and I are still finding our rhythm here. This is our home, our sanctuary, and we need privacy." Her words sliced through the air, polite but merciless. I turned to Michael, waiting for him to protest, to contradict her, to remember that I was the woman who had carried him through fevers, scraped knees, late-night fears. His face remained unreadable, and then, with the smallest nod, he agreed. The room tilted. My chest constricted, as though invisible hands were pressing down, squeezing the breath out of me. My son, my only child, had chosen silence over me. He had chosen comfort with his girlfriend over the mother who had given him life. "I would not be in your way," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "I just lost everything. I thought—" My voice trailed off. Heather leaned forward, her tone still soft, as though she were discussing redecorating rather than dismantling my hope. "It is not about trouble, it is about space. You need independence, and we need to protect our boundaries. You would be happier in your own place." Happier. The word stung like a slap. Did she not see the dirt still under my nails from digging through rubble? Did she not hear the tremor in my voice when I spoke of losing Harold's sweater, my photographs, my home? Happier alone in some cheap motel than here with the only family I had left. I looked at Michael again, willing him to stand up, to remember, to fight for me. He lowered his gaze. At that moment, something inside me broke. Not in the loud way wood splinters or glass shatters, but in the quiet, devastating way a heart cracks when it realizes it has been set aside. I picked up my bags, my shoulders heavy with more than their weight. The pristine white furniture blurred as tears filled my eyes. Heather's voice followed me, offering suggestions of extended stay motels near the mall, praising their safety and kitchens. Michael stood up, shifting uncomfortably, but no words of protest came from his lips. At the doorway, I turned one last time, hoping for a miracle. Instead, I saw my son standing in his perfect home, his arm under Heather's guiding hand, his face pale with discomfort, but firm in his decision. "Do not bother calling," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I would not want to intrude on your sanctuary." The words tasted like ashes. I stepped back into the bright afternoon, the door closing behind me with a quiet finality that echoed louder than the storm ever had. Outside, the sun shone on manicured lawns and trimmed hedges, but I had never felt such darkness. It was not the storm that had destroyed me. It was this moment, to be turned away not by fate, but by the blood of my blood, to realize that I was a stranger in my own family. That was the true devastation. The car was a faded blue sedan belonging to Mrs. Lawson, my neighbor back in Springfield. She had pressed the keys into my hand before the rescue workers loaded her into an ambulance. Her roof had collapsed, but she had family waiting in another town. She gave me the car because she said I needed it more. I thanked her with tears in my eyes, never imagining that the front seat of that vehicle would become my bedroom, my living room, and my fragile shield against the world. For 3 nights, I drifted between parking lots. Walmart became my harbor because its lights burned all night, keeping the shadows at bay. Rows of cars came and went, people running errands, shopping, living their ordinary lives. None of them knew that tucked in the corner of the lot was a 68-year-old woman sleeping in the front seat of a borrowed sedan. The first night, I told myself it was temporary. I locked the doors, pulled Harold's old sweater around me, and closed my eyes. The hum of engines and the occasional shout from teenagers outside made it impossible to sleep deeply. My neck cramped from the steering wheel pressing too close, my legs tingled from being bent awkwardly. Each sound jolted me awake. When a security guard's flashlight swept across the lot, I pretended to be dozing between errands, my pride forcing me to keep up the disguise. The second night, the rain came. It tapped against the roof like impatient fingers, leaking through the cracked seal above the driver's seat. I shifted from front to back, curling on the worn upholstery, the smell of old fabric and dust clinging to me. At 2 a.m, I walked across the lot to the 24-hour restroom. I washed my face in cold water and stared at my reflection beneath the fluorescent lights. My hair was tangled, my cheeks hollow, my eyes ringed with purple shadows. I looked less like Evelyn Parker, widow and mother, and more like a lost child hiding from a world that no longer wanted her. The third night was the worst. The temperature dropped suddenly, the autumn wind seeping into every crack of the car. I wrapped myself in Harold's sweater and then in an old blanket from the trunk, but the cold still pierced my bones. My hands shook as I clutched a photograph that I had managed to save from the wreckage. It was a family picture taken when Michael was 10. He stood between Harold and me, his face lit with a gap-toothed grin, his arms around our shoulders. We had been happy then, or at least we looked that way. I pressed the photograph to my chest, my breath fogging the glass of the frame. My body trembled, not only from the chill, but from the weight of realization. The boy in the picture, the boy who once whispered that I was his favorite person, was now the man who had turned me away. My heart throbbed with an ache sharper than hunger, sharper than the cold. It was the ache of knowing that when I needed love most, family had closed its door. I closed my eyes and whispered Harold's name into the dark. I wished for his arms, for his steady voice telling me we would make it through. But the seat beside me was empty. The house we built was gone. The son we raised had chosen someone else's comfort over my survival. Around me, life went on. Shoppers hurried in and out of Walmart carrying bags of groceries. Cars honked, children laughed, couples argued. I was invisible, a shadow pressed into a corner of the lot. The world had narrowed to 3 bags of clothing, one old toolbox, Harold's sweater, and a photograph of a family that no longer existed. I realized then that independence is not strength when you have no choice. It is a luxury you can only claim when there are doors open to you. When those doors close, when the people you love turn their backs, independence becomes exile. In those 3 nights, I learned what loneliness truly means. It is not the absence of people around you. It is the absence of belonging, the absence of anyone who sees you as worth sheltering. As I clutched the photograph tighter, my tears soaking the frame, I thought this must be the lowest point of my life. A 68-year-old woman, shaking in the cold, praying for sleep in a parking lot, unwanted by her only child. That was the cruel truth of family. When you are at your weakest, sometimes the very people you trust most are the ones who walk away. By the 4th morning in that car, my body ached in ways I had never known. Every joint throbbed, every muscle resisted movement. The hollow taste of exhaustion lingered on my tongue, and the stale air of the sedan clung to my clothes and hair. I had spent 3 nights pretending that I was invisible, slipping from parking lot to restroom, from one anonymous corner to another, avoiding the stares of strangers who might guess that I had nowhere else to go. My purse was lighter by the day, my wallet holding only a few crumpled bills and coins. I sat hunched over the steering wheel, forehead resting on the cool plastic, when my hand brushed against something inside the inner pocket of my purse. My fingers closed around a slip of paper so thin it felt like tissue. I pulled it out carefully, afraid it might disintegrate in my grasp. It was a business card, yellowed with age, its corners frayed. The ink had faded, but the name was still there. David Anderson. My breath caught. The name pulled me back half a century. High school dances, late-night drives, whispered promises under a summer sky. David had been my first love, the boy with storm-gray eyes who dreamed of building something lasting, something that mattered. He had promised to return for me after college, but life had swept us onto separate shores. I married Harold, steady and dependable, while David chased ambition. I had heard stories over the years, whispers from mutual acquaintances. David had built a construction company in Texas, expanded it, turned it into an empire. He never married, people said, too busy, too focused, or maybe too haunted. I traced the faded letters with my fingertip, the old ink smudging faintly against my skin. My heart pounded as a thought bloomed, fragile and terrifying. What if the number still worked? What if he still remembered me? The rational part of me laughed bitterly. You do not call someone after 50 years because you are homeless in a Walmart parking lot. You do not reach for a memory when your reality has fallen apart. Yet the other part of me, the part that had clutched a family photograph through sleepless nights, whispered that perhaps memories were all I had left to reach for. My hands shook so violently that I nearly dropped the card as I punched the numbers into the borrowed phone. Each ring stretched my fear tighter. Twice, 3 times, 4. I closed my eyes, ready to hang up, ready to abandon the foolish hope before it could embarrass me further. Then, a voice. Low, steady, unmistakably older, but still carrying the timbre I remembered from long ago. Anderson Development. This is David. The world seemed to stop. I almost pressed the button to end the call. My throat closed around words that refused to come. Finally, in a rush of desperation, I forced them out. David, this is Evelyn Parker. It used to be Evelyn Miller in high school. Do you remember? There was silence. For a moment, I thought the line had gone dead. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then he spoke, my name falling from his lips in a whisper that sounded like disbelief. Evelyn? Hearing my name in his voice broke something loose inside me. I started to apologize, words tumbling over one another. I should not be calling. It has been too long. I did not know who else. My house, it was destroyed in the storm, and my son, he cannot take me in. I am sorry. I should not. Stop. His tone shifted, sharp with urgency. Tell me where you are. I am in Springfield. In a parking lot. I am fine. Tell me where exactly. The sound of movement came through the line, the scrape of a chair, the slam of a door. I am already walking to my car. You do not have to, I stammered. I only called because I needed to hear a friendly voice. I did not expect. Evelyn, he interrupted again, firmer now. Tell me where you are. I am coming right now. Tears blurred my vision. 50 years of silence, and yet here was David Anderson, ready to drop everything because I had whispered his name. In that instant, something inside me that had been frozen since the tornado cracked open. Hope rushed in like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. I gave him the address, my voice trembling. Before I could say more, he added softly, "You do not need to explain. You called me. That is all that matters." When the call ended, I sat in stunned silence, the phone slipping from my hands into my lap. My pulse thrummed wildly, my breath shallow. I had no idea what I had just done. Maybe it was madness, maybe it was salvation. All I knew was that, for the first time in weeks, I was not entirely alone. As I waited, staring at the frayed business card lying on the dashboard, I whispered into the stillness, half to Harold, half to myself. Maybe some promises do not die, even after 50 years. And I let myself believe, if only for a moment, that life might still hold one last surprise. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that love can wait patiently for the right moment to return, then please like this story so it can reach more people. Your support helps us share hope where it is most needed. The hours after that call stretched endlessly. I sat in the borrowed sedan, the frayed business card still lying on the dashboard like a relic, and felt my nerves coil tighter with every passing minute. I had not seen David Anderson in 50 years. I was no longer the 17-year-old girl who believed that love could conquer distance. I was 68, weathered by storms both literal and figurative, and I looked every bit of it. What would he think when he saw me? What kind of fool was I to believe this man, now successful and powerful, would still want anything to do with me? The sun had nearly reached its peak when a silver Cadillac pulled into the lot. It moved slowly, deliberately, as though searching for someone. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I sat frozen, hands gripping the steering wheel, afraid to hope, afraid to breathe. The car stopped 3 spaces away. The driver's door opened, and there he was. Even across the distance, I knew him. His hair had turned silver, his shoulders broader, his frame heavier with the weight of years. But the moment his eyes found mine through the windshield, time collapsed. The storm-gray eyes that had once promised me forever were still the same. I wanted to hide. My clothes were wrinkled from days in the car, my hair matted, my face worn. Shame burned through me. Yet before I could lower my gaze, he was already walking toward me, his stride confident, his expression soft. He tapped gently on my window. My hands shook as I rolled it down. For a heartbeat, silence passed between us. Then he smiled, and his voice came low and certain, carrying across 5 decades, as if not a day had passed. "You look beautiful." The words shattered me. All the grief, the loneliness, the rejection from my own son crashed over me at once. I began to sob, great racking sobs that shook my entire body. I could not stop them, nor did I want to. After holding myself together through storms and silence, I broke open completely. David opened the door and helped me out. His arms wrapped around me, strong and steady, smelling faintly of clean linen and cologne. I buried my face against his chest, clutching his sweater like a lifeline. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe. For the first time in years, I felt chosen. "I am so sorry," I gasped between sobs. "I should not have called. I should not have dragged you into this." "Shh," he murmured, his hand stroking my back in gentle circles. You should have called years ago." The contrast tore at me. Just days ago, I had stood in my son's perfect home, listening to him nod in agreement while his girlfriend told me I did not belong. My own child, the boy I had raised, had turned away. Yet here stood the man I had not seen in 50 years, holding me as if I had never left his heart. The rejection of my bloodline had nearly destroyed me, but the embrace of an old love pieced me back together. When my tears finally slowed, I pulled back slightly, embarrassed by the wet stains on his sweater. "I must look terrible," I whispered. David cupped my face in his hands, his thumb brushing a tear from my cheek. "You look like a woman who has survived a storm. That is not terrible, Evelyn. That is strength." I stared at him, overwhelmed. "Why are you here? Why are you doing this for me?" His smile deepened, lines creasing the corners of his eyes. "Because I never stopped wanting to be here. Because when I heard your voice, I knew it was the moment I had been waiting for." The parking lot around us seemed to fade. Cars came and went, shoppers bustled with carts, but none of it mattered. All I could see was the man before me, the boy I once loved, the proof that sometimes love does not die but lies dormant, waiting for the right moment to be called back to life. I thought of Michael then, of the cold finality in his voice, of the silence that followed my plea for shelter. The pain was still raw, but standing in David's arms, I understood something new. Family can fail you, children can turn away, but love, even if it arrives late, even if it circles back after half a century, can still rescue what is broken. As David guided me toward his car, loading my small bags into the trunk as though they were treasures, I felt the shift inside me. I was no longer only the woman abandoned by her son. I was also the woman remembered, sought after, and embraced by a man who saw me as worthy. And in that moment, I allowed myself to believe that late love, unexpected and improbable, could save even the most shattered heart. The drive south felt surreal. I sat in the passenger seat of David's Cadillac, watching the landscape roll past, unable to believe that this man beside me was real. His hands on the wheel were larger now, marked by veins and strength built over years of work, but they were steady, certain. Occasionally he glanced at me, and every time his storm-gray eyes softened, as if he could not quite believe I was real either. After hours on the highway, the scenery changed. Wide fields gave way to rolling hills, then to neighborhoods where houses stood farther apart, their driveways lined with stone markers and iron gates. Finally, we turned into a long path bordered by oak trees that arched overhead like guardians. At the end of the drive rose a home that took my breath away. It was not ostentatious, not the kind of mansion that screamed for attention. Instead, it was graceful, built of stone and timber, with tall windows catching the late afternoon sun. A wraparound porch invited visitors to linger. The house looked as though it had been standing for generations, yet it pulsed with life and care. "David," I whispered, my voice catching. "This is incredible." He parked in front, but he did not immediately get out. Instead, he studied the house with an expression I could not read. "It is too big," he said quietly. "It always has been. I built it thinking one day I would fill it, but—" He shrugged, a gesture so familiar that it made my chest ache. Some dreams take longer than you expect. Inside, the house was even more stunning. Hardwood floors gleamed under the light of chandeliers, ceilings soared high, and furniture was tasteful yet comfortable. But it was not the elegance that struck me, it was the warmth. Books filled shelves in every room, photographs sat on tables, fresh flowers brightened corners. This was not a museum of wealth. It was a home waiting to be shared. As I moved through the rooms, I felt an unfamiliar sensation. Not intimidation, though the scale of it was overwhelming. Not envy, though I had never lived in such abundance. It was the startling feeling of being welcome. That evening, David led me into the kitchen, a wide space filled with copper pans, marble counters, and windows that opened onto gardens outside. He moved with ease, pouring glasses of water, slicing bread, cooking as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I sat at the island, hands folded, watching him with a strange mixture of wonder and disbelief. "Tell me about your life," he said, setting a plate in front of me. "Tell me about Harold, about your son, about everything I missed." No one had asked me that in years. Conversations at holidays with Michael had been brief, distracted, overshadowed by his phone buzzing or Heather's interruptions. Neighbors sometimes asked, but their eyes wandered before I finished. Here was someone looking directly at me, waiting patiently, hungry not just to feed me, but to hear me. I told him everything. I spoke of Harold, dependable and kind, who had given me stability if not passion. I spoke of raising Michael, the struggles, the sacrifices, the love poured into every moment. I spoke of the storm that had taken my house and the rejection that had cut deeper than any wind. My voice wavered, my hands trembled, but David never interrupted. His gaze stayed fixed on me, steady and gentle, as though every word I spoke was precious. When I finished, silence filled the kitchen, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. David leaned across the counter and placed his hand over mine. His palm was warm, his grip firm but tender. "I am sorry," he said softly. "I am sorry for the losses you have carried, for the pain you have endured. But Evelyn..." His voice caught slightly, as though the words had waited too long. "I am not sorry you called me, because I have never stopped loving you." The world seemed to tilt. My breath caught in my throat, and tears stung my eyes. I shook my head, unable to believe. "David, it has been 50 years. We are different people now." He smiled faintly, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. "Different, yes, but the heart does not measure in years. Every choice I made, every building I raised, every success I chased, it was always with the thought that maybe someday, somehow, you would come back into my life. And now, here you are." I pressed my other hand to my mouth, trying to stifle the sob rising in my chest. His confession poured into the cracks of my broken heart like sunlight through shattered glass. I had been told by my own son that I was a burden, unwanted. Yet here was a man who saw me as the missing piece of his life. For the first time since the tornado, I did not feel like debris scattered by the wind. I felt like someone worth choosing. The night grew quiet around us. Outside, crickets began their song, and the last light of day faded from the windows. Inside, I sat across from David Anderson, my first love, my unexpected rescuer, and realized that sometimes loss is not the end. Sometimes it is the clearing away of old walls to make room for something new. And in that moment, I dared to believe that perhaps my story was not ending, but beginning again. News travels quickly, even when you wish it would not. I do not know exactly how Michael first learned that I was no longer drifting between shelters and borrowed cars, but I imagine the neighbors in Springfield had something to do with it. Someone must have seen me leave with David, noticed the gleaming Cadillac that carried me away, and whispered the story down the line until it reached him. The first call came one quiet afternoon while I was arranging fresh flowers in the living room. My phone buzzed with Michael's name on the screen, and my heart clenched. For weeks I had dreaded hearing his voice, but curiosity and a lingering ache made me answer. "Mom," he said, his tone carefully casual. "I have been trying to reach you. Where are you living now?" I hesitated, glancing around the warm, sunlit room with its tall windows and shelves filled with David's books. "I am staying with a friend," I replied cautiously. "A friend?" His voice sharpened, the words stretched with suspicion. "Mrs. Patterson said she saw you with some man. Is that true?" I drew in a steadying breath. "Yes. His name is David Anderson. We knew each other a long time ago." Silence followed, long enough for me to hear my own pulse in my ears. Finally, Michael spoke again, his words wrapped in feigned concern. "Mom, you barely know this man. Are you sure it is safe? What do you really know about him?" I wanted to laugh at the irony. My own son, who had turned me away when I was most vulnerable, now suddenly worried about my safety. But beneath his tone, I caught the edge of something else. Curiosity. Calculation. In the weeks that followed, Michael's calls became more frequent. At first he asked about my health, my routines, even my meals, but the questions soon shifted. What kind of work does David do these days? How big is his company now? Does he travel much? What kind of investments does he have? The pattern was impossible to ignore. He was not interested in me. He was interested in what my connection to David might mean. One evening, David invited Michael to dinner. I was nervous, uncertain of how the two most important men in my life would meet. When Michael arrived, he shook David's hand with forced enthusiasm, his smile too wide, his compliments too polished. Heather stayed home, but her absence was louder than words. We sat around the table while Maria, the housekeeper, served roasted chicken and vegetables. Conversation began politely enough, but soon Michael's true intentions emerged. He leaned forward, glass of wine in hand, his voice measured. David, Mom tells me you run quite an operation down in Texas. Development, right? That must be fascinating work. I am in insurance myself, mostly commercial properties. I think there might be ways for us to connect, maybe even collaborate. David listened, expression calm but unreadable. He set down his fork and folded his hands together. Michael, he said, his voice steady, I appreciate your interest, but let us be very clear about something. Your mother's happiness is not a business arrangement. If you want a relationship with her, it cannot be built on networking or opportunity. It has to be built on love, and love is proven by actions, not by calculations. The words hung heavy in the room. Michael's face flushed, his confident smile faltering. I do love my mother, he muttered, shifting in his chair. Then show her, David replied simply. Not with promises, not with what you think you might gain. Show her with the way you treat her, the way you make her feel. And because from where I sit, it looks like you only remembered her once you thought there was money involved. I sat frozen, my breath caught in my chest. No one had ever spoken so directly to my son, not even Harold. Michael lowered his gaze, his jaw tightening. For the first time in years, I saw him look not like a polished professional, but like the boy who had been caught in a lie. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, Michael pushed back his chair, muttering something about needing fresh air. He walked to the patio, leaving David and me in the stillness of the dining room. I turned to David, my eyes stinging. You were harsh. He shook his head. I was honest, and honesty is sometimes the only way to clear the fog. Later that evening, Michael returned, quieter, more subdued. He hugged me before leaving, something he had not done in years, though it was stiff and uncertain. As the door closed behind him, I realized the truth. My son was standing at a crossroads, forced to choose between love and selfishness. Whether he turned toward me or away was no longer in my control. But one thing had become clear. For the first time in a long time, the line between genuine affection and opportunism had been drawn. Sometimes love must be tested, not by storms or disasters, but by the courage to face the truth. And in that moment, I knew David was right. Family is not proven by words. It is proven by action. 6 months passed in a way I never could have imagined. What began with a phone call from a Walmart parking lot unfolded into a new life I had not dared to dream of. Seasons shifted, the air softened into spring, and the gardens around David's house bloomed in waves of color. For the first time in years, I felt rooted again, not in a house filled with ghosts, but in a home built on love. When David asked me to marry him, he did not do it with spectacle. There was no grand gesture, no glittering ring under restaurant lights. He simply took my hands one morning as we sat on the porch, coffee steaming between us, and said, "Evelyn, I have waited 50 years to share my days with you. Let us not waste another." His words were enough. I said yes with tears in my eyes, and he smiled as if the last half-century had finally been mended. Our wedding was not a grand affair. It was quiet, intimate, held in the garden behind his house on a crisp October morning. The oak trees whispered overhead, and the roses, planted months earlier with my own hands, opened their petals as though blessing us. The minister was an old friend of David's. The only witnesses were Maria, his housekeeper, and Thomas, his business partner. I wore a simple blue dress, and David wore a charcoal suit that made him look distinguished and steady. Michael came too. I was not certain he would, but David encouraged me to give him the chance. He stood awkwardly at the back, his suit pressed but his expression uncertain. He did not bring Heather. I noticed immediately, though I said nothing. During the ceremony, he remained quiet, his face unreadable, but when the vows were spoken and David kissed me, I caught the faintest smile tugging at my son's lips. Afterward, as we shared a modest lunch beneath the autumn sun, Michael approached me. His words were halting, stripped of the smooth, rehearsed tone he once carried. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "I am glad you are happy. I mean that." It was not a grand reconciliation, not the sweeping embrace of a prodigal son returned, but it was honest. For the first time in years, his words felt unpolished and real. That, I realized, was enough. As the months unfolded, our relationship settled into something quieter but truer. He called occasionally, no longer with probing questions about David's business, but with simple ones about my health, my garden, the book club I joined in town. It was not the bond I had once dreamed of, but it was honest, and honesty has its own kind of beauty. I often think back to that tornado, the way it tore through my world with merciless force. At the time, I believed it had destroyed me, but standing in David's garden as his wife, I understood something new. "The storm destroyed my house," I whispered to him one morning, "but it rebuilt my heart." He squeezed my hand and smiled, and in that moment, I believed it. To those listening, to those who carry their own storms, I want you to hear this. You are never too old to begin again. Do not let anyone convince you that your life has ended, that you are only a burden to be carried or set aside. Love, hope, and renewal do not belong only to the young. They belong to anyone brave enough to open the door when life knocks again. And if this story has touched you, if you see yourself in my journey, I invite you to join me in building a circle of strength here. Subscribe to Grandma's Final Chapter and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Let us show that love and resilience know no borders, because sometimes the storm does not come to end your life. Sometimes it comes to clear the way for the life you were always meant to live. Closing message. As I sit here reflecting on everything that has unfolded, I am reminded of how fragile and yet how resilient the human heart can be. A storm may strip away the walls of a house, a betrayal may tear at the bond between parent and child, and years may scatter the people we once thought we would never lose. But through it all, there remains a quiet truth. The heart is capable of beginning again. This story was mine, but in many ways, it may also be yours. Perhaps you too have faced a storm you did not think you could survive. Perhaps you have known the sting of being turned away by someone you loved, or the loneliness of feeling invisible in a world that moves too quickly. And perhaps, like me, you discovered that life still holds surprises, sometimes in the form of people who return to us, sometimes in the form of strength we never realized we carried. That is why Grandma's Final Chapter exists. Not to dwell on sadness, but to remind us that hope belongs to all of us, no matter our age or circumstances. These stories are for healing, for connection, for reminding each of us that we are never truly alone. Now, I would like to invite you to take a small but meaningful step. Share your own story. Tell us in the comments what moments shaped you, what storms you have weathered, what second chances you have embraced. Your words may be the comfort someone else needs tonight. And if this story touched your heart, please press the like button. It helps this message of hope reach further than we can imagine. Share this video with someone you care about, someone who may need to hear that they are stronger than they believe. And most of all, subscribe to Grandma's Final Chapter so you will not miss the next story, the next reminder that it is never too late to begin again. Because together, through our stories, we build a community where every voice